Hi, good afternoon. My name is Vrinda Narain. I'm the Associate Dean of the Faculty of Law here at McGill University, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce my good friend and famous activist, social political activist from India, Professor Aruna Roy, who is the Professor of Practice here at the Institute. So Aruna, welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to having this talk with you. We're going to just have a conversation, but perhaps just to start it off, I thought I would ask you about your experience here at the Institute.
Well, I've never really taught a full course before. Years ago, when I started working, that's about 40 odd years ago, I was a teacher
Yes.
in my college, but after that I haven't taught. So when I got this letter out of the blue from McGill, asking me whether I'd be a professor of practice, 2016 professor of practice, I wondered whether I should or shouldn't come. Then I had this little conversation with my colleagues and friends, and they
Yes.
all said I should go. And for me, it was a kind of very interesting challenge to transfer my experience of so many years in working with communities for social and economic and political rights, democratic rights, turning it into a course, and then seeing how I would communicate what I had learned in a succinct, cogent, and logical manner to a set of people who probably had no clue where I was from, politically or in terms of culture, in terms of background. And yet I found it quite interesting, because I feel now that talking to people who don't know you is more of a challenge to oneself, and it sort of also provokes you to think of methods of communication.
That's right. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, how was your experience with the students? Because we're very proud of our undergraduate students here at McGill. They're very bright. And so I was wondering how your classroom experience was and how you translated your activist knowledge into intellectual labor for them.
Well, the first day I went into the classroom, I had a big argument with myself, because as a teacher, I was an absolute novice, but as an activist communicator, I was really seasoned. So I thought to myself, well, they're young comrades, I don't have to think of them as students.
Right.
So I just talked to them as if they were my young friends in a movement scenario. And it took very well indeed. So it was interactive. There were points at which I emphasized something, and we did have readings, and we had all the academic input and rigor was there. But the entire 3 hours that we spent together in the seminar room was interactive.
Right.
And I learned as much as I think I transferred from me to them. And it was so empowering to see young people think seriously, to apply their minds, and to be bothered about
Right.
the conditions in which the world was, not only their immediate environment.
That's right. Well, you were kind enough to invite me to your class, and so I saw the level of engagement that they had, and I have to say that you're their number one guru now. So they were very excited and thrilled to be in your class, and I run into some of the students now and then, and I keep hearing praises of your class, and I think for many of them it was a transformatory experience to be in that class and to be somehow taken out of their political context, and to think of that. So one of the challenges is transnational activism and cultural exchange. Did you find that a challenge in conveying to them?
In the classroom, it wasn't that difficult, because I always brought in one North American campaign,
Okay.
movement, struggle,
Right.
to sort of emphasize the Asian experience.
Okay.
And even in Asia, we brought in lots of different kinds of movements and commentaries on those movements.
Right.
So it was, I think, for me too, this was learning, because I hadn't studied so closely the
Right.
North American movements. So it was good for us. And so the context was established, and actually, because we were talking about democracy and participation in democracy, we're talking about transparency and accountability, they are universal principles.
Right.
And that made it much easier to talk about its application across cultures and across nations.
Right.
And interesting debates on what is a nation, and this invoking, this bogey of nationalism these days.
Yes, absolutely.
And restricting dissent and freedom of speech. They were very interesting classes. I really enjoyed them.
Well, that brings me to my next question that I wanted to ask you about. One of the highlights of your semester here was the fantastic international symposium that you organized, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience of that. What were the highlights of that international meeting where you were able to bring together a number of scholars and activists from all across the globe to come here to Montreal, to McGill?
Well, it was. I didn't believe that people would come because we gave them too short notice.
That's true.
Actually, we didn't give them even 2 months, and they're all big people with tremendous commitments.
Right.
So I was just crossing my fingers and hoping everybody would come, but they did come.
Right.
So having Patrick Heller and having John Harris and having Parasuraman and having all the other activists who came from all over,
Yes.
and our local stars like Ellen Gabriel and Murray Wilson.
That's right.
It was a great learning experience for me as well. But what it really has started, this dialogue between practitioners and theorists, is an interesting and important debate today, because democracy, we've always said that no matter who wins or loses, democracy always wins. But with
That's
recent
right.
elections all over the world,
Yes.
democracy is the loser. So it's really put a great deal of pessimism into our minds. And this workshop really showed us a way forward, because it unpacked participatory democracy into the details. And it's when you unpack a problem, it's always easier to solve it. And I think one sure thing that most of the participants felt as they left the workshop was that participatory democracy is perhaps one way of solving it, with its strengths and its challenges.
Right. So, but one of the challenges that we have now, particularly in post-election America, is how do you engage citizens in that democratic process? And it seems as if there is a sort of a democratic deficit in the way the outcome has challenged many of our understandings of what democracy is, what equality is, what workers' rights are. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think there are certain periods in history when we are forced to think about those things. And once we struggle and get what our basic rights are, we tend to get complacent. And I think, especially in North America, where it's so easy to access everything, there's a
Right.
degree of complacency. And I think what has really been shocked and rocked is the degree of complacency that things will happen as they've always done, no matter what we do or don't do. And I think the interest now of all citizens in the US should be how to engage. Small engagements, large engagements, not forgetting that each one of these engagements has the same components.
Yes.
And the same issues and principles you're struggling for. But this engagement will lead to larger political education, which alone can then translate into national successes and national understanding of democracy.
Just to follow up with that, I mean, there are huge numbers, large groups within democracies that are disenfranchised. So what is the message for them, not just in the United States or in Canada, but also in India? Because I think that this is it's a cross-cultural conversation. It's a two-way dialogue, and a lot of the insights that we've learned from your symposium here are also lessons we have to take back to the Indian context. So,
see, in India, dramatically different in texture from North America, the largest numbers of voters are the poor. So
That's
the
right.
poor do vote. It's actually the elite and the middle class that don't vote. And in the build-up to the elections, it's the main discourse that is set for pre-election discourse
yes,
is shaped by the large numbers of disenfranchised. They have to be somewhere taken into consideration. But I think the challenge for India is accountability. What
Right.
we really need to struggle with, and we are doing it, is when you make electoral promises and don't keep them, then what happens? Like, we were told that good days are coming, but there are no good days for us. So the disenfranchised with whom I work and with whom I've spent all my life, we're still struggling for rations, we're still struggling with demonetization, we're struggling with every policy that comes is loaded against us. So there's now a furious debate in the underbelly of India, saying, where are those good days?
Right. So the next part of your of this symposium that you've had over here, I understand, is going to be in Kerala, in India. Right. So in terms of the agenda for that, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was, how does one take away from that the way in which democracy works? It's not enough to have people who just go to vote. It's not enough to recognize that there are huge disenfranchised, disempowered groups, but also we need to focus on how we build just institutions. So is there any message for people in India struggling with those kinds of issues?
In India, see, after all, in the post-2004 period with the UPA government, people's movements managed to get 5 or 6 very good laws in place. We got the right to information law, the right to work law, the right to food law, we got the right to forest rights law, we got the Domestic Violence Act.
Yes.
And all these acts were in place, and they were our acts in a sense. We moved for those laws. So now we have understood that to some extent all these are governance issues. They're also institutionalizing it, looking at systems, putting them in place. So I planned it in such a way that we do one Kerala workshop, because Kerala government, with its civil society, put in place what was famously known as the People's Plan. So people planned for themselves and implemented it's now about 2 decades old, but it's still going strong. So that's why we chose Kerala, so that the practitioners would then lead the discussion in Kerala. The theorists led the discussion in McGill. So we have theorists in McGill, practitioners in Kerala taking over the main body of the discourse. And we will showcase some of the ways in which we've been able to get justice, access to government services, because of the way we addressed systemic change in India.
So one of your huge successes across the nation in India has been your success with the Right to Information Act. So you really are, you're not just a national leader, you're a global leader. So there are all kinds of ramifications and responsibilities that go with that. So as you're reaching your last few days here at McGill, do you have any message for us here at McGill?
Well, in India, we are 8 million people who use the Right to Information law every year. And in the Works Act, you have 29 million workers who get work every year. So if you look at the scale at what India has done, I would say that perhaps there are now lessons to be learnt the other way around. And I think for many years we thought lessons had to come from this part of the globe to the other part of the globe. I think in democratic practice, there are more lessons in the South that will probably show how, in fact, even the US can deal with the waning trust deficit of democracy.
That's right, which is a crucial question at this point. Well, thank you very much, Aruna. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I thank you for sharing your time with us here for the 1 semester you've spent as a professor of practice here at the Institute. I know your students are going to miss you very much, and so are all of us. So we're hoping to see you here, your schedule permitting. Thank you.
I'd love to come back, and I'm sure I will. I'll miss all of you too.
Thank you.